everyone, and welcome to our online hangout space hashtag Chat Up Real Talk, Real Impact, brought to you by Quarantalk Media and supported by the United States Embassy in the Philippines. I'm your host, Jermaine Halandoni de Runia. And here on Chat Up, we bring you conversations on social issues and various advocacies. So please join our chat, keep your messages and questions coming, and share this live stream using our official hashtags hashtag chat up and hashtag real talk, real impact. Let's now dive into today's discussion and find out what's up. So recently, social media went abuzz when a celebrity was quoted saying history is like chismes or gossip, casting doubt on facts in history. In this episode, we shed light on the value of history. That is history as opposed to mere gossip and hearsay, and upholding history in the age of social media, misinformation, and disinformation. To tune in and keep your comments and questions coming to join our conversation. Rather. All right, so let's now call in our guest. Our first guest is an assistant professor at the Department of History in the University of the Philippines. He handles general education courses on Philippine and Asian history. He also teaches Introduction to World Civilizations, and his research interests include Philippine historiography, intellectual history, the history of the Philippine left, martial law studies, and Marxism in history. Let's all welcome Professor Francisco Jaime Paulo Gio Guiang. Hi,
Hi,
Gio.
hi, good evening, Maine, and good evening to everyone who is tuned in to Chat Up. I hope we're having a very productive Monday today.
Yes, we hope so too. Thank you for joining us, Gio. And our next guest is Historic Sites Development Officer from the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, or NHCP. He was part of the curatorial development of several museums in the country, which include the Museo ni Marcela Marino at Felipe Agoncillo, and Museo ni Leon at Galicano Apasible in Taal, Batangas, Museo ni Jose Rizal in Dapitan, Zamboanga del Norte, Museo ng Libingan sa Ilalim ng Lupa in Nagcarlan, Laguna, and Museo ni Jesse Robredo in Naga City, Bicol. He also helps with the needs of the inter-regional cluster of the NHCP museums. He graduated from the University of the Philippines with a bachelor's degree in history and is currently taking graduate studies in Philippine studies. Joining us is Eufemio Agbayani III. Hi, Eufy.
Hi, hi, good evening, everyone, and I hope we have a very historic night. Uh, good evening, everyone.
Thanks, you, Vince. Again, hi, Gio, and welcome to the show, everyone. Thank you for joining us this lovely and hopefully productive Monday evening. This is a historic event na sabi nga ni Yufi. Marami nangyari ngayong araw. So very apt itong topic natin for this evening. So simulan na natin yung ating pag-aaral or discussion on what history. So we need to understand muna, no? I think before we tackle history, we need to understand what history is. So my first question to the both of you is, what is history? And may science ba, or is there a science behind it? Meaning, do we do like historical method, interpretation, and any other things na may scientific basis in terms of history? I'll ask Gio first.
Okay, so yung history kasi, well, at least in the Philippines, we consider it as a domain of the social sciences, di ba? I always teach my students that history, that's why it's a discipline, because it follows the scientific method in creating historical narratives. And I also teach my students na the discipline of history is not purely scientific because it's straddled between the domain of the humanities and the social sciences. Saan papasok yung domain ng humanities? And this I learned from one of the readings that is required to us in the undergraduate level. One of the articles written by Teodoro Concilio. No? Sinasabi niya na yung very aspect ng yung humanistic aspect ng history is that it does not only it's considered a part of the domain of the humanities because it studies human activities in the past, and moreover the process by which we interpret the past through records involves us to include imaginative construction. uh, Imaginative construction, if you're going to look at it, fiction writers do it. Diba? They imagine things in order to satisfy the plot that they have in mind. But ang kaibahan nito sa history, and that's why precisely history straddles also to the domain of the sciences, the social sciences, is because we have to make sense of the facts taken from primary sources, archival documents, so on and
Right.
so forth, primary sources, and we construct a narrative of what probably happened in the past based on what the primary sources are telling us. So we're creating a story based on factual evidences through primary source taken from primary sources. Unlike fiction writers, where their imagination is sky is the limit, so to speak, historians are bound by the facts that they have at present. Nakakulong kami doon sa facts. Hindi kami pwede mag-add ng details sa historical narrative na walang primary source.
Mm-mm.
Because that's bordering fiction writing already. Wala siyang
Right.
factual basis. And in creating a historical narrative, like what I mentioned earlier, we follow a step-by-step procedure, the scientific method in order to create a historical narrative. So it makes so that's pretty much in a nutshell historical method, imaginative construction through interpretation, and that what makes history as a discipline a domain of the social sciences, but also also penetrating the domain of the humanities. No, so in a nutshell, yan yung mahaba pa. We can I'm sure Yufi can add more to what I've said.
All right. Thanks for that, Gio. Yuffie?
Oh no.
Yeah,
And
go ahead. Go ahead.
sorry. Nakamute pala ako kanina. So na-discuss na ni Sir Gio kanina what history is mostly, no? And we need to clarify to people that history is not necessarily the same as the past. People kasi pag sinabi, past is past, tapos sasabihin, history na lang yan eh. Di naman na dati
Mm-mm.
kailangang alamin yan. But history is searching for the truths from the past, no? Uh, and yung isa ring gusto kong definition na ginagamit, lalo na sa Filipino ukol sa kasaysayan, yung sinasabi ni Jesus Salazar na salaysay na may saysay sa mga taong pinagsasaysayan. So, ibig sabihin, we don't just write stories about the past na wala lang, gusto lang namin ito isulat.
Right.
But rather, we write these stories so that it can be useful for the people who will be expected to read it. No?
Right.
Not necessarily dahil kausapin isang buong bansa or not necessarily because kausapin isang buong society, but rather, for example, histories can be written for certain sectors of people. Histories can be written for certain localities. Histories can be written for certain groups of people, no? So, yun yung difference ng history, for example, sa anything na gumagawa lang ng
Mm-mm.
kwento, no? So
Right.
it has to be based from facts. If merong butas, um we use what we call hedging. So it is believed that uh
Mm-mm.
someone said so and so without saying na yun na yun.
It is the truth.
Uh
Yes. Yeah.
Oo, kasi minsan kasi may narinig lang na someone said it, we accept it agad as history. Hindi. You have to check kung totoo yung sinasabi niya. And if we cannot verify it 100%, we say someone said this and we will cite
Right.
who said that. No?
Right.
So yun yung difference, yun yung function ng history. And siguro kaya rin maraming kung nagtitake ng BA history na nag-aabogado is basically kung ano yung ginagawa ng abogado sa korte, gathering evidence, forming a narrative around using those evidence, and then presenting that narrative with the evidences. Paano yung ginagawa ng abogado sa korte, ginagawa ng
Mm-mm.
historiador
Mm.
sa pangkalahatang lipunan. I remember one of our former chairpersons, Maris Joc, no, uh, once told us that they were talking with his father. She was talking with her father, Kapepe Joc, no, the famous senator, and he said, "Alam mo, parehas na tayo ng trabaho. Ang pinagkaiba lang, yung kliyente mo patay na, yung
Mm-mm.
kliyente ko buhay pa." So
Mm.
Mm-mm.
parang ganun yung similarity. And in a way, it's also similar to journalism,
Right.
except that journalism is much more current, no? Ibig
Mm.
sabihin,
Mm-mm.
they record events as they happen, and then
Mm.
we can use their output as part of the wide array of evidences that we can use for writing history. And history is also a discipline such that yung merong history kasi na academic, writing papers, presenting them, publishing them in journals, writing dissertations, publishing books. Meron ding history that is public history, basically answering the questions the public has about the past. And yung way of answering those questions, not necessarily through very lengthy uh, papers, but through narratives that are easy to understand
Mm-mm.
and relevant to people's daily lives.
Right. Right. All right.
Yung,
Thanks
may
for
add yung
yeah.
sa
Go ahead.
public history, ano yan, kahit ang nakikita na natin, di ba, UP sa museum, pupunta yung mga bata, ganyan, mga adults. Bago yan mailagay on display, it undergoes a vetting process of whatever
Mm-mm.
narrative that is
Right.
presented in the museum.
Right.
So it undergoes the same science that is being undertaken in writing lengthy journal articles
Mm-mm.
because it's being presented to multiple publics. So
Mm-mm.
kailangan siguraduhin ng mga public historian professionals na tama yung information na nandyan sa museum, for example. Kasi yan yung makikita nila at i-absorb nila yan at ikikwento nila yan sa mga
Mm-mm.
kamag-anak nila o sa mga estudyante nila, mga classmate nila. So, it takes, in my opinion, it brings the notch higher kasi you have to engage multiple publics, you have to simplify your language as opposed to academic writing, hindi ba? And you have to make sure na tatagos doon sa publiko, sa multiple publics, yung mensaheng pangkasaysayan na gusto mong iparating, no? So it's all
Mm-mm.
grounded on facts and science.
Right, right. So, going back to that, no, Gio and Yuffie, you mentioned, may mga tumatak sa akin salita eh. History is not necessarily same as the past, but it is the search for truth. So, truth partnered or coupled with fact, evidence, and piece of evidence. So, meaning, you really have to be careful on what you present. Kagaya ng sinabi ni Gio, kasi you're putting it out to the public and kailangan inaral mo ito. So, on that end, ang susunod kong katanungan, can history be biased or opinionated and or opinionated? If so, in what ways? Start naman with Yuffie.
It can be biased in the sense na yung pagpili mo pala ng topic to research
Mm,
on, meron ka
mm-mm.
ng choice doon. So, anything that involves human choice can be
Right.
biased. Ang struggle and ang goal ng historian is to go beyond that bias, no, to not allow that bias to cloud your judgment, to affect how you collect the data and how you present the data. Kasi masasabi mo lang na bad bias yan kapag meron kang hypothesis in your mind and then you gather sources, um, and then you process those sources, tapos meron kang hindi isasama kahit nakita mo siya just because it goes
Mm-mm.
against your hypothesis, no?
Right.
Which brings me to the nitty-gritty of the process. I think maganda ma-discuss natin to, Sir Gio, no? Yung process, yung historical method undergoes three main activities. Una, pang-apat siguro kung isasama mo yung pagpili ng topic. And
Mm.
then you gather the sources. And then there are types of sources. Not all sources are equal. You have primary sources which directly witness the event that you're trying to research on. Pwedeng diary yan, pwedeng newspaper accounts, or in modern times, kahit
Mm-mm.
video, audio files, pwede yung ma-count as primary sources. Anything that directly witness the
Mm-mm.
event that you're trying to research on. And then you have secondary sources which process those primary sources, or perhaps meron ng paglalapat ng interpretation. Uh, Kasi hindi na siya yung direct na nakakita doon sa
Mm-mm.
event that they're trying to research on. So you have primary and secondary sources. And then after you gather them, uh, you analyze the sources. First, you check yung tinatawag naming external rather criticism. You check if the document is genuine. Baka
Mm.
naman niloloko ka lang ng dokumento, baka peke yung dokumento. And in history, just ko Lord, ang daming peke yung dokumento, nakakaloka. Um, After you check the document kung totoo ba siya, like, ganito ba yung papel panahon yun? Is that, ito ba talaga, ganito ba talaga yung itsura ng mga documents noon? Na Photoshop ba yung picture, for example. After analyzing that, y- nag-undergo siya ng internal criticism. Saka mo ngayon iintindihan what the document is trying to tell you, what the source is trying to tell you. Uh, Intindihin natin siya in the context of the time when it was produced, kung ano yung pinagdadaanan nung gumawa nung source, and so on and so. And ipagtatambal natin siya sa ibang source, no?
Mm-mm.
Na sasaliwa ba yung binibigay nila impormasyon o hindi. After analyzing the sources, after gathering those, saka ngayon magsusulat ng narrative. And hindi may iwasan na yung milieu ng writer might have an effect on what the a person is writing. Pero gaya nga na sinabi natin, yung limitasyon ng tao pwedeng ma-overcome uh, by sticking to the sources, by
Mm-mm.
making sure na kung ano yung na-gather mo, you be honest with it, and you present everything uh, so that so that hindi ka masabihan na selective ka lang doon sa mga sources na
Mm.
pinipili mo.
Mm-mm.
So doon siguro in a sense nga in topic, you can be biased about the topic, you can have an opinion based on what you read, pero you don't stop at being biased and opinionated. You don't let the bias and the opinion overtake you, no? So
Mm.
Right.
yun yung mahalaga.
Mm.
Okay. Thanks,
Sige.
Gio.
Going back a bit doon sa sinasabi ni Yuffie na history, before I answer directly the question of bias in opinion in history, yung historical method and history as an event and history as a narrative, which is two different things. Um, Kaya dito na pine-present, I mean, inaamin ng mga historians that history is an open book. Hindi naman lahat ng sources alam na natin eh. Kung may primary sources tayo na pwedeng ma-discover sometime in the future, na legitimate primary source that can revise our current understanding of a
Mm-mm.
past event, then it is the duty of a historian to revise history in a scientific manner in order to update historical knowledge. Di ba? Yun yung duty ng
Right.
isang historian at history researcher. Now, inaamin din ng mga historians that history narratives are a glimpse of the past. It's not the totality of the past. You could just imagine na sobrang daming events simultaneously na nangyayari in the past. Hindi kaya ng kapangyarihan ng isang historian na makalap lahat ng primary sources on a single event and every perspective. Because you have to ask several questions there. Um, did everyone witness that event? Among those who witnessed the event, did they record the event? For those
Mm-mm.
who
Mm-mm.
recorded the event, did the recordings, the writings survive throughout time? Let's say may nag-survive na mga dokumento about a certain event throughout time, let's say 100 years. Are those documents still legible? Are they readable? Hindi ba? Mamaya basang-basa na yung ink, nag-blot na, hindi mo na mabasa. Are they stored properly in the archives 100 years later? Maswerte na kung nakita ng archives to begin with. Hindi ba ng mga archaeologists natin and what? At kung ano yung nasa loob ng archives, yun yung gagamitin ng historian
Mm-mm.
sa kanyang pag-aaral ng isang certain past event. At hindi lang siya titigil doon, isuscrutinize pa niya. Sabi nga ni Yuffie, internal, external criticism. May cancellation pa yan eh. Parang i-eliminate mo pa yung mga primary source na pwede mong magamit. So dito ngayon natin napapatunayan that history is a glimpse of the past. But because we use the scientific method to create a narrative, then we can assure the public that what we have for a history narrative is an academic and scientific study of what could have happened in the past based on facts, hindi ba? So glimpse siya, no? Now, in the question, in answering the question of bias in opinion, tama si Yuffie na sa simulat sa pool pa lang, papili pa lang ng topic, ano na yan, may bias na
Yung
mag-undergo
bias,
dyan.
yeah.
Si Isidoro Agoncillo mismo na nagsabi, and nag-agree naman lahat ng mga social scientists sa kanya, that we cannot eliminate human bias 100%. We are all biased, biased individuals. But what Isidoro Agoncillo, for example, in some of his articles, he really wrote very good articles on history writing, says is that we have to be impartial. So iba yung yung impartiality, no? Kasi meron pa siyang sinasabi na parang na parang scholars daw who strive to achieve objectivity in their studies can be fools. Kasi nothing is absolutely objective daw. Kasi even statistics can be corrupted. Parang ganyan, it can be fabricated, di ba, numbers. So what you have to do relating to history sources, primary sources, is to be impartial. Being impartial is you be fair with what the sources, legitimate sources, are telling you. If source A is telling you this, source B is telling you the otherwise, then you should make sense out of them. Use your logic. Be fair. Now, I remember kasi naging prof ko din si Dr. Jock, no, na nasa NHCP dati. Sinasabi niya, you have to write dispassionately. Yan yung kanya to avoid yung certain attachment mo sa isang topic. To regulate your bias, hindi ba? Write dispassionately as if you are outside that event looking inward through primary sources. Yun yung sinasabi niya, no? I mean, there are so many classic cases or examples in not only in the Philippines but also outside the Philippines na sinasabi na makikita natin na talagang biased accounts of history. Siguro isa sa mga dahilan kung bakit merong biases sa history is may ulterior motive, may objective na sinusubukang i-attain. We have to understand that because in the profession of history, well, we are all expected to be professionals, but the delicate thing about the practice of history writing is that's why, di ba, Yuffie, ang sinasabi sa atin, you have to write about a person or an event 30 or 20 years later. Di ba gano'n? Para may detachment, yung mga historical actors ay more or less patay na or what, hindi ba? Kasi for example, nagsulat ka ng isang biography ng isang person na buhay pa tapos pinondohan ka. Medyo mahirap siraan yung nagpopondo sa iyo, mas lalo kung politiko pa at pwede kanyang i-threaten. Hindi ba? Parang bakit ganito? In-expose mo yung corruption
Definitely, yeah.
Sa dokumento nakita ko sa primary source. Pag-iisipan mo 'yon. So those are mitigating factors to think about when it comes to biased accounts of historical narratives, no? You may think about factors like who is the funder? Is the funder still alive? Hindi ba? Kamag-anak ba nung historiador yung sinusulat niya? Hindi ba? So, these are some, I'm not saying na, kasi meron namang mga historiador na may kamag-anak na, they're really good writers, really fair, they produce really fair historical accounts. But these are factors that you have to take into consideration in order to detect whether historical narratives tend to be biased or not. Hindi ba? May mga ganyang factors na hindi natin maiiwasan.
All right. Thanks for Gio and Yumi. You mentioned nga na na hindi talaga natin maiwasan yung biases. Lalo na ngayon in the age where you can publish your thoughts and put it online and you can easily go viral on social media. How do we protect facts? Ito, ang dami yung processes that you do. May for primary, secondary sources, may sinasabi pa kayong canceling out ng mga nakita. You have to be really detached sa pagsusulat nyo. And yet, may mga ganitong nangyayari. The search on online, then they can publish their thoughts. How do you really protect facts and the integrity of history? Especially when dominant narratives could be the one that's ingrained in the consciousness of the public. Kasi yun yung lagi nila nakita. How do we do that? Yufi.
Ang isang struggle dito kasi is that sometimes people don't want to know the the facts. Ayun, binibigyan, ika nga, yung binibigyan mo na ng resibo, binibigyan mo na ng patunay, ayaw pa nilang maniwala. No?
Right. Oo.
There's a struggle. And to be honest, I also find myself asking that question. But the primary thing that we can do to protect facts and the integrity of history is to, whenever we say something, as much as we can, as much as the space allows, we need to cite our sources so that the public, pag nahimasmasan, they can look back at that and check, ay, oo nga, totoo nga.
Mm-mm.
Or they can dispute your statement in a respectable manner na, ay, I saw this document and this is what it says and it appears to contradict mine. Uh, that used to be the process, no? That used to be the norm. Now, whenever I say something, I say where I got that information, and if someone wants to question me, they will present either a different reading of the
Mm-mm.
source I presented, or a totally different source that more or less ay kasing credible. Hindi siya magpapakita bigla ng document na inedit sa Paint, nalalagyan ng pirma ng kung ano-ano. Tapos sabihin, ito yung dokumento namin. No? Kasi external criticism pa lang, X na.
Mm-mm.
Ang masaklap kasi ngayon, and we have to admit this, we have to accept the reality, na minsan you do your part to tell the information, bibigay mo yung sources, tapos yung magko-comment sa'yo sabihin, hindi, ano ka lang eh, kasi ganito ka. Something,
Right.
something one ka, ganyan.
Mm-mm.
Which is sad, no? But
Mm-mm.
historians and people who believe in facts have no choice but to continue telling facts and providing their sources, so that if people are curious enough, they can find it out. They can check the sources and they can analyze it for themselves and arrive at a conclusion that is based not on feelings, not based on rumors, but based on facts. Um, sa level ng historiador, yun yung task niya. Cite your sources, but also there's another effort that needs to be done, and that is to make the sources available. Kasi we can say all the books that we've read, we can
Mm-mm.
mention all the documents that we've cited, but if these books or if these accounts are not accessible to the public, how can they check? How can they verify? Kahit sobrang bilib na siya sa historical method, if these sources are not available to them, at ang mas nagiging available sa kanila ay yung mga TikTok short videos or yung mga videos sa YouTube, then hindi nila magagawa yung process ng analysis. So, yun. To summarize, first, the historians should continue to cite their sources as they do
Mm-mm.
at ginagawa nila ng mga historiador ito. And pangalawa, we need to make these historical sources available to the public. Ang struggle lang nga dyan is that how do we process yung facts in a way na magkakasya halimbawa sa limited number of characters ng Twitter, dun sa
Mm-mm.
limited number of seconds sa TikTok,
TikTok. Right.
or kasi kapag nag-nobela ka bigla sa Facebook, baka pagdating dun sa dulo hindi na niya binasa kasi ang dami mo na
Mm-mm.
sinabi.
Haba na.
So,
Yes.
yun yung struggle ng historiador ngayon at ng mga tao na
Mm-mm.
naniniwala sa katotohanan.
All right. Thanks, Yufi. Gio?
Oo, so how do we protect facts? Tama kasi tama yung mga ano yung binanggit ni yung feed, dudugtungan ko na lang yun. We have to make it public, available to the public. We have to make history, the discussion about different topics in history in vogue. Kumbaga, very relevant, no? Andiyan
Right.
lagi, no? That's why andiyan papasok yung kanina nabanggit natin sa discussion yung role ng public history. Parang it is at its most crucial in recent developments that we are under the context of the pandemic and we only have the internet, hindi ba? For example, we course through our public discourse through the internet. Importante yung mga webinars katulad na ito. That's an exhibition of public history. That's a practice of public history to bring the discipline closer to multiple publics. And that's one way of protecting facts and protecting the integrity of history. Do not let the so-called peddlers of fake news and disinformation or pseudo-histories run out free in the internet. Um, uh, we have to face the reality that the social media is very powerful, and social media content are one of the most accessible contents, mostly relating to history, yung mga pseudo-historical narratives nandyan sa YouTube, TikTok, tas nire-repost sa Facebook and whatnot, no? Yan yung unang na-expose yung mga netizens. Mas lalo nang
Right.
we are in our second year and more on the pandemic, hindi ba? And we have the internet as primary source of information, as major source of information. So kailangan makisangkot ng mga historiador. That's one way of protecting the integrity of the discipline and protecting facts is to make it public, make the discussion very relevant, always there, and makisangkot dun sa ganitong social media platforms. Kasi doon nanggagaling yung distorted versions of history that we are already experiencing in the present, we are already encountering, no? This is not to, I mean, this discussion is not to demean or maliitin yung value ng academic writing, no? It's always talagang mahalaga yung academic writing because sometimes, most of the time, academic works like peer-reviewed journals and what have you are primary sources for policy making, di ba? Mahalaga yan. But in the age of social media, in the age of digital media, we have to package our academic discourse in a way that is most understandable and most
Yes.
consumable by the public, by the general public. Hindi naman lahat ng nasa internet nagbabasa ng academic sources. Gaya nga sabi ni Yufi, di ba? Paano ipagkakasya ng mga historiador into X number of characters sa tweet? Hindi ba yung
Mhm.
kanilang arguments? No? So that's the challenge to the history community, no? Makisangkot sa iba't ibang forma ng public history, especially yung may kinalaman sa social media. And that's one very good way of protecting the integrity of the discipline and protecting facts is by um, uh, allowing the professionals from the history community to speak out on these digital platforms, for example, that is very na talagang patok na patok ngayon, hindi ba, na talagang tinatangkilik ngayon. At dito nanggagaling kasi yung disinformation, misinformation primarily. No? So that's one way, no? Um, digitization is one. You have to make it available to the public through digitization. We have to digitize the sources, but there are many factors that come into picture. For example, diba? Mahirap. Narinig ko sa UP Library, they purchased scanners, high-grade scanners that is worth, I think, almost 500,000 pesos each. Mahal yung mga ganitong
Mm-mm.
equipment. Um, Government funding is essential for that. And that's one step closer of bringing the discipline to closer to the multiple publics is by making the sources available to them digitally. Hindi
Right.
ba? Kasi yung iba yung for example, even my students are all amazed when I present them primary sources o 19th century digitized primary sources. Ngayon lang sila nakakita ng ganon. Kasi wala naman sa internet na nagpo-post na
Mm-mm.
kukunti lang. Di ba, UV? Alam natin yan sa history community natin. Like Jim Richardson, for example, regularly post snapshots of primary sources, hindi ba? And talks about it on the internet. But we have to make these types of conversation commonplace in the internet. Hindi ba? And dapat makihalo para ma-expose yung general public dito. So digitization is one. Nagsisimula na ngayon yung pag-digitize, but it's all parang ano yan, nakikita ko so far sa internet is personal efforts eh. Di ba? Parang
Right.
volunteerism,
Oo.
personal effort.
So,
But
so Gio,
makakatulong
sorry.
talaga ito, well-oiled funding from the government.
Mm-mm. Oo, ayun. Going on that note, no, sorry to cut you off. Kasi you were mentioning na lahat is parang private and hindi lahat, no? So you need government funding. So ngayon ang tanong is, sorry, what is the role kaya ng schools and other institutions such as NHCP or National Historical Commission of the Philippines in the preservation of our country's history in fighting misinformation and disinformation? Sapat na ba yung sinasabi natin na digitization? Ano pa kaya yung other ways wherein they can participate in the fight against misinformation? Anyone can start.
Ay, siguro banggitin ko muna yung efforts sa opisina, no? For some people, kailangan ko lang i-explain, no? People kasi expect the NHCP to be the one na bengador eh. Kasi di ba kami nga yung
Right,
main
right.
history agency. So lahat ng bagay ifa-fact check namin. Unfortunately, some of the claims kasi are partisan in nature.
Mm.
And unfortunately for us as a government institution, we cannot dip our toes on politics. Even if people inside want to, hindi pwede sa amin 'yon. However, what we can do is to make sources available. And sa ngayon, we're preparing, hopefully it happens soon, we're preparing to share primary sources online. Sa ngayon, ang nasa-share pa lang namin, again, secondary sources na to, ay yung mga historical markers for starters. May mga paunti-unti na rin na individual documents that are being made available in public and mga biographies of heroes. Pero admittedly, konti lang yon kumpara halimbawa sa mga bagay na binabahagi ng mga institutions abroad like yung Biblioteca Nacional de España, yung paborito nating Pares. Pares as in Portal de Archivos Españoles, hindi yung kinakain. Yung mga share na iba pang websites. And even in the Philippines, may mga nag-digitize and nag-make available na rin online like yung UST Miguel de Benavides Library, yung Philippines Heritage Library, and believe it or not, yung National Library, meron na rin sila mga files available online that you can download. Yun nga lang, iisa-isahin mo kasi it's designed for people with slow internet. Um, Nagkakaroon na ng effort to digitize and to upload these primary sources online, primary and secondary sources. Isang paraan din na may tutulong ng NHCP recently, awan ko lang sayang na para tapos na yata yung deadline for submission. Naglabas kami ng call for grants. So, big sabihin, we will be granting some individuals funding for research projects. Kasi magastos mag-research. Uh, Kapag hindi freely available yung sources sa online or sa mga physical repositories, please pardon my place. Merong
May
magsasakit.
nagmamadali yata.
Oo, nagmamadali yata siya. Tawag dito, it can cost a lot. Kahit nga sa National Archives, yung kating-kating na kami na, kailan ba kayo mag-digitize? Yung pagkuha pa lang ng copies sa National Archives, may bayad.
Mm-mm.
So, it's costly. So, the least that the NHCP and the National Commission for Culture and the Arts can do is to grant funding for research. And then at the same time, yung NHCP then is also in the work of producing public history materials like short videos, documentaries, yung pagpapatakbo ng museo, no? Uh, this is one way of trying to saturate um, society in general of historical consciousness at kung paano ba ginagawa yung history. So, in that note, banggitin ko lang din na next month, History Month na. So, I hope everybody can celebrate with us History Month. So, yun yung maiaambag ng NHCP. But
Mm-mm.
admittedly, a lot can be done more if the government
Right.
supports NHCP, and a lot can be done more if the private sector supports private sector initiatives and private institutions that also preserve history.
Thanks, Yufi. Gio,
Mm.
ano
So,
kaya yung role ng school institutions? Go ahead.
oo. So yung mga academic institutions, well, they have to take public discourse out really in the public. Kasi pag sinabing public discourse sa loob ng akademya ang nag-uusap dyan
Mm-mm.
yung mga, yung mga scholar di ba, sa isang conference,
Totoo.
for example. But when we say public discourse, dapat i-involve natin yung multiple publics.
Mm-mm.
That's one way which I can say na the academic institutions or the individuals who are members of academic institutions can fight misinformation and disinformation. Um, Pakikisangkot sa public discourse sa online, yung gaya na nabanggit ko kanina, online, iba't ibang social media platforms. Ginagawa na yan, for example, ni Prof. Xiao Chua, di ba? Lagi
Mm-mm.
nating nakikita
Yes.
online sa ibang webinars. Sila Yufi, ginagawa nila yan sa Twitter, hindi ba? Ano nga Yufi yung inyong hashtag sa
Yung
Twitter?
History Space PH.
Oh, yun. Hindi
He,
ba?
he
That's
does,
pakikisangkot sa public discourse, no? May mga Twitter spaces, tama? Di ba, UP, mga Twitter spaces, ito that involves not purely the academic community, but netizens, general
Right.
public.
Right.
Ginagawa na, for example, nila Beto Ocampo, who is the former chairperson of the National Historical Commission. Tapos yun nga lang, gaya nung nabanggit ito ni ni Prof. Xiao Chua nung na-interview ko siya last week or last week ata, na sabi niya na kaya naman kasi natatakot yung yung kaya naman may hesitation ang historians, for example, at history researchers to speak out in the public using the media, the different forms of media, is because of baka mag-trample upon yung public scrutiny. Look at what
Mm-mm.
happened to Sir Beto Ocampo, hindi ba grabe ang trolling, no? Grabe ang trolling sa kanyang accounts, no? But that's the nature of a polarized cyberspace 'Di ba? Social media very polarized ngayon no? And hindi naman siya hopeless. There is there is meaningful discussion through social media na
Mm-mm.
nadadala sa social media, and this is a one way talaga, a very good way of fighting misinformation and disinformation, where academics can take part in that types of public discourse. Meron din, for example, sa fact-checking. Madalas media outlets na nagpa-fact check. May mga nakakasama ako sa UP na may mga involvement sila sa iba't ibang organizations na nagpa-fact check na din sila. Alam nila yung mga datos, alam nila yung mga literatura tungkol sa isang topic na paksa ng fake news at disinformation, at direktang nafa-fact check nila yon. That's one way of fighting disinformation and misinformation. All of these, what I've said, is on top of what was mentioned earlier. Now we have to make sources available. We have to make the studies available on the internet, on public, no?
Right. Right.
Because we also have to go to the extra mile of discussing with our audience, the multiple publics, through social media platforms.
Yeah.
I-discuss natin kasi it's one thing that we make it public. Pag hinayaan mo lang yan, nakaka-intimidate kasi minsan ng academic jargons. So we have to use our expertise and package our expertise in a way na maiintindihan tayo ng publiko, na nakikipag-usap
Mm-mm.
talaga sa publiko
Right.
through the use of these social media platforms. So that's one way of fighting misinformation and disinformation.
Thanks, Gio. Talagang kagaya na nga to, no, the medium that we are using right now, using and capitalizing social media and making sure na accessible lahat ng mga sources na to. And of course, may guidance from individuals like you when interpreting yung mga nakasulat doon. No? Kasi ayaw naman natin na mula naman sa mga nabasa nila, magkaroon ng, doon magmula yung misinformation. No? So ito, Gio and Yufi, lagi nating narinig itong nababanggit to. It's a quote, no? Na parang, ano masabi niyo dito sa sinasabi nila na that history is written by the victors? How can we strike a balance when history is written by the victors? So paano naman yung hindi matuturing na victors on the side of history na yon? Yufi?
To be fair, may kilala akong Victor na nagsusulat ng history at yun ay si Dr. Victores. Jose Victor.
Yes,
Pero,
yes. Oh, I know. Before, yes.
pag totohanin natin yung history is written by the victor, siya lang ang pwede magsulat ng history. Pero, napaliwanag din namin kanina ni Sir Gio yung historical method. And history is written by
Mm-mm.
historians.
Right.
Period. Ah, ito hindi ko maintindihan sa mga tao bakit pag quotable quote, akala na nila yun na yung
Yeah, it's true.
kabuuan at katotohanan, no? Na basta quote siya, totoo siya. Lagay natin sa
Mm-mm.
tabi ng isang quote card, totoo na siya. But we have to disabuse that notion na history is written by the victors kasi everyone can write history as long as they follow the process. Marami sa mga kilalang historiador hindi naman nag-history major.
Mm-mm.
Kung yung nagkakamali, ay, na history major naman si ano, 'di ba? Si Teodoro Agoncillo. Halimbawa, si Domingo Abella ay MD, si Luciano PR Santiago ay psychiatrist yata, si
Ano, Freddy Corpus.
Odi Corpus ay economist. So, marami sa mga historiador na kilala ay hindi naman din history major. But because they
Mm-mm.
followed the historical method, may tuturing natin na yung kanilang mga naisulat tungkol sa nakaraan ay history. Ganun din, may iba kasi mga nahihiyang sumulat ng kasaysayan ng kanilang bayan, kasaysayan ng kanilang organisasyon, kasi they feel na, ay, hindi kami kasi history major, baka kulang yung aming training. But, kaya nga nagpapa-webinar at nagpapa-seminar ang UP Department of History, ang NHCP at iba't iba pang institusyon is to teach the method so everybody can engage in history and write history
Mm-mm.
as long as sumusunod sa historical method. So the
Method, yeah.
victors can write their history, the vanquished can write their history, the
Mm-mm.
people in the middle can write history, everybody can write history as long as they follow the historical method. And we have to highlight yung as long as they follow historical method kasi may mga tao they claim na, ano naman pala everybody can write history. So tong sinulat ko, history na rin to. Pero, yun pala, hindi pala ginamitan ng
Mm-mm.
maayos na historical
Mm-mm.
method. Or ang masaklap pa nga, nakapagsulat nga ng history, ah, sinusulat yung history para lang makabenga doon sa mga established histories. Pwedeng mag-question as long as may basis yung pagke-question. Hindi yun para lang makabengka. I think
Yeah.
alam niyo na ni Sir Gio kung sino yung mga tipong tinutukoy ko, no?
Mm-mm.
So yun, history can be written by everyone and
It is.
bihira, especially sa Philippine history na lagi tayo natatalo. Parang bihira yung history is written by the victors. No? Even the vanquished write their histories. And they should.
Right, right. Thanks, Eufemio.
Ang naiisip ko dyan sa history written by the victors kasi yung iba parang ang perspective ang nakikita ko sa social media perspective nila is sino yung nagwagi sa isang historical
Mm-mm.
period, no? Ang
Right,
naisip ko
right.
dyan sa quote na yan is ano ba yung dominanting perspektiba sa isang historical period kung saan sinulat yung isang historical narrative. Pwedeng ganun eh. Di ba? Pwedeng ganun na for example, inaral to ni, I'm sure inaral ni Yufi ito sa ating undergraduate courses na sa kasaysayan ng pagsusulat ng mga kasaysayan sa Pilipinas ng mga history books. Iba-iba yung stages ng historiography, medyo technical na ito, 'di ba? Na parang for example, there was a time that history books are written in the perspective of the Spanish because
Mm-mm.
they after all colonized us for more than 300 years and sobrang daming dokumento on Spanish colonial period for 300 years, no? And then there was a time when there was a reaction to this. Ito yung balitaktakan sa pagsusulat ng kasaysayan para i-upturn yung sinasabi nating ano ba yung dominanting perspektiba sa isang historical frame. Sila ba yung tinatanaw natin na victors? For example, kasi Spaniards, nandito 300 years. So, you would understand kung ikaw ay nag-aaral ng kasaysayan na may mga history books talaga that's really dominant yung Spanish perspective. Tapos biglang papasok, for example, sila Teodoro Agoncillo. Perspective of the Filipino people ang sinulat nila. Kaya sila binansagan na nationalist historians, a direct reaction to the dominant colonial historiography. Sila Renato Constantino na gumamit ng Marxist point of view sa kasaysayan,
Mm-mm.
perspektiba ng quote-unquote masa, hindi ba? And then marami ng mga nag-emerge in recent years na yung sinasabi din ni Yuffie, doon ako nanggagali, gusto ko to idugtong doon. Yung sinasabi na the vanquished can also write their own histories. In one way of saying this is the sectors of the society that are relatively unheard in past historical narratives are already writing their narratives. For example, malakas na malakas ang social history, yung kasaysayan ng ordinaryong tao. Kasi madalas ang nababasa natin yung great names in history, big names, presidente ganito, yung bayaning ganito. Perspective nila yung pinag-uusapan sa history books. But with social history, ano yung experience ng common tao sa isang given historical period? Or women's history, for example.
Mm-mm.
Sinusulat na ang role, ang importanteng role ng kababaihan sa bawat historical period in the past. Di ba? Perspektiba ng kababaihan sa kasaysayan, yung role ng kababaihan sa kasaysayan. At ang dami-dami na eh, 'di ba? 'Di ba yung nakita natin subaltern histories, history of the othered, mga ganyan, history of the oppressed, no? So, when you ask how we can strike a balance, there are developments within the history community and outside the history community. Kasi when we talk about the history of the subaltern or the history of the other, this basically multidisciplinary yung nature eh. Hindi lang naman historians na nagsusulat tungkol dyan. But there are recent movements and there are recent trends in history writing, in historiography, that tend to strike a balance when it comes to dominant narratives in history writing.
So
Right,
magdagdag
thanks.
pa ako ng konti, Sir Gio tsaka Ma'am Jermaine. Pati yung types of sources that can be used in
Mm,
history, lumalawak na rin. Kasi people might think na basta walang picture, walang
Mm-mm.
dokumento, walang record, ano na agad yan. Hindi na pwedeng gawa ng history. But, mas lumalawak yung acceptance ng oral history. Kasi, for
mm,
example, paano mo i-document yung pagkaka-torture sa'yo? Yung pagkaka-rape,
mm,
na-witness kang massacre. Ah, mahirap yun i-document in the traditional sense, no?
mm,
Mag-document lang yan either kung magsusulat ka ng memoir or something. But the trend now is to accept these oral histories, to analyze them, to give the benefit of the doubt dun sa mga nagkikwento. Kasi people say, ay ano, kaya lang yan nagkikwento na na-torture siya kasi kontra siya sa gobyerno, bla bla bla. No? Pero uh, yung acceptance ng oral accounts in history, malaki yung nagagawa to allow people who could not write their histories before to write their histories. Um, Yun yung ang challenge na lang dito is that paano maibabahagi itong mga kasaysayang ito. Kasi baka yung mga traditional histories, yung mga dominant narratives, yung mga history na sinusulat ng victor na hindi victores, ah yun yung nagdo-dominate kasi yun lang yung nagiging available sa mas
Mm-mm.
malawak na publiko. Ang challenge ngayon is to make these histories from people who are not usually read, people who are not usually heard, to for their stories and for their histories to be made available to the public and to encourage empathy from people, no, na porque meron na sila predisposed political inclinations, hindi na nila babasahin or hindi na nila susubukang
Mm-mm.
intindihin. Yun yung masaklap. Pero kailangan natin mag-develop ng empathy na yung pinagdaanan nila valid, yung pinagdaanan nila worth remembering and worth retelling.
Right, right. Thanks, Yufi and Gio. Before we go, any last words or calls to action or any event and campaign to promote from NHCP or from UP or any activities that you guys are a part of? I'll start with Yufi.
So, next month, August, will be History Month, and we invite everyone to celebrate with us because sometimes we think of history as a narrative of failures, of problems, of issues, of sadnesses and tragedies, but there are a lot of things to celebrate in histories.
Mm-mm.
A lot of victories, victory in terms of winning against oppressors, winning against those who rob against us, those who steal our futures. No? Maraming maipagdiriwang sa kasaysayan. Bagaman marami ring mga bagay na mapapait na dapat din nating matandaan. And this is that's why yung theme namin for History Month this August is kasaysayan, kamalayan, kaunlaran. History, consciousness, development. It's necessary for our nation to learn our history, to have a historical consciousness, to achieve a certain level of development. And we will be launching our official logo soon. We will be also launching History Month in a big way soon.
Mm.
Marami sa mga naka-line up na activities for History Month are webinars, exhibits, commemorative activities, and the like. And invite ko na lang yung lahat na pumunta sa Facebook page ng NHCP, fb.com/NHCP1933. We also have a website, nhcp.gov.ph. And sa Twitter naman, ang handle namin is at NHCP Official. So you can get updates sa aming mga activities through the social media uh, accounts. And even this week, marami kami mga naka-line up na webinars so people can listen so that they can find different perspectives in history. So maraming
Yeah,
salamat po.
thank you, Yufi. So I hope everyone can check that out. NHCP can be found on Twitter, on Facebook, and of course they have their website as well. And we're looking forward to yung celebration for History Month this August. Gio?
Mm. Yung UP Department of History, ilo-launch niya yung taunan niyang serye ng activity in commemoration, in celebration with the History Month din. Buwan ng kasaysayan. So, ilan yung mga webinars na nakahanda. Ang isang pwede kong masabi na gagawin is a teachers training seminar. At tungkol siya sa Gumburza. Gumburza at 150 kasi 150th ng Gumburza 1872
Mm.
martyrdom, hindi ba? So, yan ang tema ng teacher training seminar para sa buwan ng kasaysayan. At yun din ang magiging tema. Ito hindi pa pinipreempt ko na, pero ilalabas na dito anytime soon ng annual Philippine-Spanish Friendship Day Conference. Nakaangkla siya sa tema ng Gumburza at 150. So malapit na ilabas yung call for papers and participation para sa annual conference na ito. This is funded by the government through the NHCP, di ba? The National Historical Commission of the Philippines. So, abangan na lang yan na ipopost sa Facebook page ng Department of History. Research na lang sa Facebook, UP Departamento ng Kasaysayan. So, laging nandoon naman yung update ng activities niya. And i-announce ko na lang din na yung isang organization kung saan ako ay bahagi, yung Tanggol Kasaysayan din, maglo-launch siya ng isang libro sa September, Martial Law at 50 na libro, new perspectives and interpretations on different topics and narratives on the martial law kasi 50th commemoration ng martial law sa September 21, 2022. So, may definite date na yan, September 23, 2022 yung book launch ng Martial Law at 50. At isa itong hybrid event, face-to-face and online. No? So abangan na lang ang announcements, pwedeng pumunta sa Facebook page ng Tanggol Kasaysayan. So, yun lang yung mga ilan sa mga activities na may i-anticipate natin.
All right, thanks, Gio. So, ang tabayanan yan, check out Tanggol Kalikasan's Facebook. Handa nila, especially for the launch of Martial Law at 50, no? Isang libro at marami activities na naka-line up for that. Once again, thank you, Gio. Professor Gio Guiang of the University of the Philippines History Department, and kay Eufemio Agbayani III of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your insights with us today. And thank you. And pagpatuloy lang ninyo. And thank you again for all the work that you do. So that's it. We were able to talk with Professor Gio Guiang and Yufi Agbayani III. What the importance of history, and like what they mentioned, no, ang history ay hindi lang ito basta chismis. It is founded by different pieces of evidence, and historical facts. It's based on facts and pieces of evidence. Hindi ito basta kwento lang na narinig at walang pinagbasihan. And sa panahon ngayon, the times of disinformation and misinformation, we have to be vigilant. And we have ways in order to combat that. We can capitalize on social media. It's apologies. I mentioned tanggol kalikasan. It's tanggol kasaysayan rather. Apologies for that. So going back, we really have to capitalize on social media and do the things that we can in order to fight misinformation and disinformation. Make sources available, make it accessible, and make it relevant to the public by creating maybe videos that's based on historical facts, by pieces of evidence, and make it more bite-sized for people to be engaged and more people to be part of discourse in order for us to really know what history is, because history is not just mere chismis. So that's it. Once again, thank you for joining us in this episode, and thank you for joining us. And please share our live stream for more people can watch and join our chat. So use our hashtag chat up and hashtag real talk real impact. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's Quarantalk Media, and follow us on Facebook for more updates and programs. You can find us at Quarantalk Media. And we are also on Twitter. Our handle is at Quarantalk Media. I am Jermaine Halandoni Deruna. Connect with me online on Facebook. That's Jermaine. On Twitter, rather, it's Jermaine J. Deruna. On Instagram, it's at Jermaine Halandoni Deruna. And on Facebook, it's Jermaine Halandoni Deruna. So join us again next month for another Real Talk here on hashtag Chat Up Real Talk Real Impact. Have a great week, everyone.